Hey, happy Wednesday morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And we are closing in on finalizing our examination of the 23 affirmative arguments offered by Dr. David Hester in our formal debate held July 14th and 15th, 2016, here in Ardmore, Oklahoma. In his argument number 20, and these are supposed to be affirmative arguments, and yet, as I pointed out, Dr. David Hester did not do any actual exegesis of any text whatsoever. All right? He made claims about text. He did not go to the text and draw out from that what is actually there. He just assumed his arguments. His argument number 20 was that, well, the judgment could not have happened in AD 70 because the judgment of the living and the dead did not happen in AD 70 because the judgment of former generations, such as Tyre and Sodom, did not happen in AD 70. Therefore, the AD 70 doctrine is false. Well, let's take a quick look here. And be sure to go back and look at the two previous videos on this particular point, okay? They're so critical. But here's what I want you to understand. In Revelation chapter 11, we find the destruction and the judgment of the great city called Babylon. Now, I asked Dr. David Hester, prior to the actual debate, in written form, I asked him to identify Babylon. He said it was Rome. Now, I want you to hang on to that, all right? Well, in Revelation chapter 11, we find the destruction of the city Babylon, the great city. Point number one, it's where the Lord was slain. Folks, that's not Rome, any way you want to look at it. Point number two, at the time of the judgment of this city, where the Lord was slain, we are told the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our God and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and forever. And the time has come that the dead should be judged, and that they should be rewarded, and that the prophets should be rewarded. Now, point number one, during the debate, I argued, based upon Daniel chapter 12, over and over again, that the resurrection of the just and the unjust is the, quote, final resurrection, unquote. Dr. David Hester changed his position 3 times during the debate. He argued initially, yes, it's the final resurrection of John 5:28 and 29. It's the resurrection of Acts 24:14 and 15. Well, entrapped with that, he changed his argument and said Daniel chapter 12 is not even the resurrection of John 5 and Acts 24 or 1 Corinthians 15. Well, entrapped in that, he said, well, even if Daniel 12 does predict the resurrection of AD 70, that doesn't mean it's restricted to that. 3 different arguments, 3 differing arguments on the same text. Oh, but that's not all. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 13, this resurrection of Daniel 12 would be when the prophets would be rewarded. Daniel was a prophet. He would be rewarded at the time of the end when the power of the holy people was completely shattered. Daniel chapter 12 verse 7. Okay, so what do we have? Revelation chapter 11. The judgment of the city, quote, where the Lord was slain, unquote. That is not Rome. Number 2, the time of that judgment of that city is the time when the dead would be judged. That's the dead, but it would be at the time of the judgment of the city. They're alive. This is the judgment of the living and the dead. So Dr. David Hester, when he argued that Rome is Babylon, what was he implicitly arguing? He is arguing that the resurrection of necessity happened at the fall of Rome. Look, folks, whoever you identify as Babylon of Revelation, it is at the destruction of that city, that entity, that the judgment of the dead takes place. It is at the destruction of that city where the prophets are rewarded. Well, the only place that the Bible says the prophets would be rewarded, Daniel chapter 12, at the destruction of the city where the Lord was slain. Matthew chapter 23, all of the righteous, all the way back to Abel, would be judged and avenged, that generation. And yet Dr. David Hester says, no. The resurrection of Revelation chapter 11 is at the judgment of Babylon. But Babylon was Rome. Well, guess what? That means Dr. David Hester is still a full preterist. It's just that he puts it 400 years later than the Bible does. You cannot divorce the judgment of the living and the dead from the judgment of the city where the Lord was slain. And by the way, is the judgment of the living and the dead of Revelation chapter 11, 15 and following, is that not the judgment of all the former generations? And remember that Dr. David Hester said that AD 70 could not be the judgment of the living and the dead because it was the judgment of the living and the dead is the judgment of all past generations. Okay, is the judgment and resurrection of Revelation chapter 11, is it the judgment of all the former generations? It's the judgment of the dead and the living. The time of the rewarding of the prophets, those are Old Covenant prophets. You see, everywhere that Dr. David Hester went, every argument that he made turns around and falsifies his eschatology. By arguing that the judgment has to be the judgment of former generations, by arguing that the judgment is the judgment of the living and the dead, Dr. David Hester either must take the position that the judgment of the living and the dead, the judgment of all former generations, was at the fall of Rome, or he must acquiesce and agree with the text that it was in AD 70. Or he might do as he did during the debate and create a third possibility that is not based on the text. Well, let me remind you again, please, get a copy of this book, The Resurrection of Daniel chapter 12, verse 2, Fulfilled or Future. There is an extensive discussion of Revelation chapter 11 as it relates to Daniel chapter 12 and as it relates to the judgment of the living and the dead. You're going to be amazed at absolutely how clear-cut, how precise, how emphatic and explicit the biblical testimony is that the judgment of the living and the dead, the time of the rewarding of the prophets, was in AD 70. Well, hey, thanks for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. We will see you on the flip side as we continue our examination and refutation of Dr. David Hester's 23 arguments. We'll see you on the flip side.